예.
Lavaru beyond sea. Fire!
A voice for
Wood and wood. Not Lavaru.
Not get through me.
Moet Ixie. Artifact. Artifact. Wood and wood. Lavaru beyond sea.
Parathis!
Ulu then.
You're not getting through me.
Artifact wood and Ulu then.
not now and there. I'm here.
Leave it to me.
Lavaru beyond. Lavaru beyond. Lavaru. I have failed.
I could use some time to restore my spirits.
That's the servant down, and the mistress still to go. A good start, worthy of being built upon.
Thousands of souls he has tortured. Would that he could live those sufferings 1,000.
Some point, you have to look at the things your God has.
All those lives. And at the end of them,
Can't help but feel sorry for him. To live so long without...
Theos, he had hold of your soul from a long time back, seems like. Feels good, doesn't it? Got enough to worry about as it is. You'll be feeling better soon then. Good. Got a lot of people out there thinking they've been abandoned by... If it was in my power, and I know it's not, but if it was, and after what you've been through, though, I'm sure you got your...
Ah, the end of the road greets us at last. Would that my own trial had produced such an outcome.
Theos may be gone, but his crime. Yet before you lies an opportunity to heal. People will long remember the legacy.
astounding. I always knew the Leaden Key stood for something big, but this is beyond either of us. The certainty of the gods is a mercy. Power like this is... It's your decision, of course.
Yeah?
You know something of quiet servitude, Watcher. Groveling and simpering before the gods whose aid you need, you have labored at the pleasure of others, and now the gods give you orders and commands. The exiled queen is not an ungrateful patron. Finish the work Theos began. Strengthen Woodica with these souls and allow her to become the... You say that now, but when you're standing in front of...
At your command, the ancient device became your instrument, spinning to life with deafening resonance and gathering up the swirling essence like thread on a great spindle. There, in the pale pulsing glow of the machine that set you on this path long ago, you summoned all your strength, focusing on your objective and blocking out all else. With a single concussive blast that rocked the chamber and sent you tumbling to the ground, you freed the souls from their stasis. Exhausted, your consciousness slipping away, your last sight was of the machine, dark and dormant. Then your eyes closed, and sleep welcomed you at long last. After coming to and searching for some time, you discovered the route Theos used to enter Sun and Shadow, and embarked on a long and arduous ascent back to the surface. You emerged in Ter Evron after days of tunneling through the rubble Theos had left behind, and when you stepped into the daylight, you were faced with a different Deerwood than the one you had left. At your direction, the souls diverted by Theos were guided back to the vessels originally meant for them. For the first time, parents of hollow-born children woke to the cries of their infants and looked into their eyes to see them staring back. People fell to their knees where they stood, thanking Helia or Mogren, or even Aethys for their forgiveness of whatever guilt they felt they bore. But for all the relief that had come to some parents, others only found new grief. For many thousands of Hollowborn had died during Wide One's legacy, many by their parents' own hands. For those children, there would be no homecoming. Yet the last Hollow birth was in the past now, and those parents willing to risk trying for a new child were frequently rewarded, often with twins. Many felt they saw Helia's hand in it, and the year would be remembered as the year of Helia's splendor. The loss of the souls you had promised to Entropy would be no setback to Remergant, nor to Andra, for the Beast of Winter trudges ever forward, and the will of the Lady of Lament is as unstoppable as the tide. In Deerwood, the weather quickly chilled. Unseasonable frosts destroyed the year's harvests before giving way to the coldest winter in memory. Many who survived the famine would soon freeze to death in their own homes. The oceans proved no safer. A barrage of squalls pounded the harbors along the Deerwooden coast for months, sending many ships to be forever lost in the depths of Andra's domain, either mourned or forgotten, both to the lady's liking. It is said that Galawain is the enforcer of the gods, and is known to hunt down those who wrong them. To wrong Galawain, then, is truly to wake the beast, and the father of monsters took great umbrage at your broken promise to him. Along with Mogren and Abidan, Galawain embarked upon a more direct approach to claiming his quarry. In the months that followed, the frontier settlements of Deerwood were inexplicably attacked by packs of beasts and monsters, suddenly organized and unafraid to approach Kith on their own land. Many such villages were all but destroyed by the time troops could be dispatched from local garrisons. Those that weren't destroyed by the beasts of Galawain often found themselves at the mercy of the fires of Mogren. A dry spell throughout Deerwood led to a rash of forest fires on a scale not seen since the War of Black Trees, and many settlements paid the price for their proximity to the wilderness. In the cities, meanwhile, dabblers in animancy who had placed souls into golems and other moving vessels soon found that their creations had risen up against them. Such constructs terrorized their surroundings, killing indiscriminately and often in great numbers before being subdued. Followers of Bereth have a saying that life is a debt all must pay in death, and their god is known to always collect what is owed. In breaking your word to Bereth, a debt was created. Souls were owed to the cycle, and the agents of the god of inevitability would not be refused. An epidemic of unexplained deaths struck Deerwood in the days that followed the legacy. Most often the dead would be travelers on the road, known to be a favorite target of Bereth's pallid knight, who exacts impossible tolls from those who have journeyed for too long. The elderly, too, seem to pass on in alarming numbers, but just as often, the deaths appeared to strike randomly, and for no reason at all. Those who sensed the involvement of the twinned god dubbed the calamity Bareth's Price, supposing it a payment for the end of Widewind's legacy. Lord Radric's zeal had brought him back to life once, but it would not do so again. Radric's destruction at your hands spelled the end of his suffocating rule over Gilded Vale and the surrounding area. In his absence, the village prospered, becoming a popular destination for new settlers anxious to leave Defiance Bay after the riots. Without a nearby ruler, it also grew more wild, with many settlers moving on as soon as they'd arrived, turned off by lawlessness that was excessive even by Deerwooden standards. Nevertheless, despite the challenges of living there, Gilded Vale had survived, and would continue to survive for the foreseeable future. Following the assassinations of Duke Avar Wolfgren and Lady Webb, Defiance Bay was thrown into political upheaval. In the ensuing weeks, the streets had become the domain of looters and blackguards. Few dared to step outside their own doors alone or unarmed. But once the dozens had regrouped in the wake of the riots, they quickly put an end to the criminal activity. They patrolled the streets in droves and administered their brand of law on any perceived offenders. This was not the erratic justice of the mob, however. The dozens had taken to heart the strengths of their adversaries, the Knights of the Crucible, and emerged as a far more organized, disciplined force. With the waning strength of the other Defiance Bay powers, the leadership of the dozens took the opportunity to establish its own group as the dominant peacekeeping force in the city. The dozens would soon find themselves overwhelmed by the problems of a leaderless metropolis. But they found an uneasy new partner in the surviving forces of the Crucible Knights, who understood the city's infrastructure and were able to keep the worst of its problems under control. The destruction of the machine atop Ter Noaneth spelled the end of the reanimated corpses in Heritage Hill. Though at first few were willing to venture into the abandoned district, it was soon cleaned out and rebuilt. The district's horrors still fresh in people's minds. It would be some time before it was fully repopulated, but eventually the lure of cheap prime land would all but erase the memory. The Duke's assassination at the apparent hands of an animancer had caused catastrophic rioting in the streets of Defiance Bay. But those who had escaped the melee in the palace hearings remembered the testimonies of the strange guest who had shown up that day and absolved animancy, implicating the leaden key instead. The rumor spread quickly, and soon the popular belief was that the assassin had been a leaden key spy. When the legacy had lifted, people came to see it not as a sign that the riots had been according to the god's wishes, as Theos had hoped, but as a confirmation that animancy had never been the source of the problem in the first place. Deerwoodens instead convinced themselves that the riots had somehow purged Defiance Bay of leaden key spies, and that the end of Widewind's legacy was their well-deserved reward. The rage against animancers was quickly forgotten, and those who had survived were permitted to return to Brackenbury Sanitarium and rebuild it so they might resume their studies. The town of Deerford had seen the last of the cult of Scan. Dark rumors about the town's many curses quickly faded, and travelers soon returned. The destruction of the Eyeless and the permanent loss of Abidon's memory emboldened Andra. She considered the knowledge that Kith might have found, both of the origin of the gods and her part in concealing it, and vowed that such a calamity must never come to pass. She churned up a fury in her seas. Underwater mountains rose and fell, and the seabed was swallowed and spat out again by the great maws that divide the continents of Kith. Only a fraction of this chaos reached land, but it was enough to swell rivers and spread earthquakes throughout the Deerwood and Air Glanfath. Coastal towns suffered so that few noticed the damage that had been done to Engwithan ruins, from Thane Bog to Twin Elms. Thus, they sealed off the White Forge and abandoned their pursuit of Durgan steel. Durgan's battery became a trading post once more, and Stalwart thrived in its shadow. Stalwart's revival brought trappers, traders, and artisans from all over the Deerwood, and from Red Ceres too. prosperity brought peace to the border region, as Deerwoodans and Red Serans alike left old quarrels behind. The battle against the Eyeless left Stalwart more hostile than ever toward the ogres in its midst, and the villagers grew bolder as they grew more prosperous. After a handful of bloody skirmishes, the Flames That Whisper clan left the Russet Wood to seek a quieter, more isolated home in the White March. While many such places existed in the mountains, the crossing was treacherous, and the ogres often found themselves embattled with other clans whose territory they passed. Less than half of the Flames That Whisper survived the journey, but those that did found a haven far from Kith lands. Harmka's death had brought the Devil of Carrick little satisfaction. In time, her taste for vengeance soured. What replaced it was a hunger to feel something, anything, new. Summer had thinned the snowpack twice over when she felt the joint at her elbow first begin to stiffen. She turned her back on the hopes of animancy and civilization and walked east. She pushed through the mountains, past Raid Ceres, and into the broad plains of Ishamiddle. She had forgotten what it was like to simply journey, no goal or destination in mind. Though she felt nothing more than the steady thump of her feet on the road, the endless horizons and grassy meadows were new to her. She measured her time in the gradual rusting of her body and was satisfied. Her movements slowed, but so did the world around her. Waist-high grasses undulated and tacked in the wind, as gradual as the tides. Sparrows and blackjays made steady pilgrimages across the sky, each flap of their wings a solemn salute. She could hardly move when she found something she had never seen before, the ocean. With the last of her strength, she pulled herself beneath the water, content at last to feel the movement of currents and the constant caress of the waves. Free from the burden of her memory, Maneha soon left the gift-bearers and resumed adventuring. Now that she had a taste for the world, she wanted to experience it anew. Maneha rediscovered her zest for battle, extravagance, and romance. She kept her gaze on the horizon, looking from one journey to another more distant, from the lover in her arms to another more fervent. Hers was a life of excitement, violence, and passion. She moved too quickly for regret to catch up with her, and she hoped only that she might outpace it in the next life as well. The fortress of Cadnua emerged as a bastion of security in the midst of an untamed land, becoming the envy of every thane and earl in Deerwood. Legend grew over time of its impregnability, and stories of formidable invaders easily scattered by the keep's defenses became popular around the hearths of Deerwoodinians. Likewise, it also became a beacon to travelers, merchants, and visiting dignitaries alike. Reputed as the finest fortress in all Deerwood, people would journey from near and distant lands alike to experience its fabled hospitality and grandeur. Pallegina had followed her orders from the Duke's Bells, helping establish an exclusive trade arrangement between the Valian republics and the tribes of Erglonfath. With the Deerwood's people still weakened by Widewind's legacy, the Valian republics easily pushed their would-be competitors out of the market. The Deerwoods suffered as terribly from the lost trade as the republics benefited from it. Pallegina was honored for her service by being assigned as the personal guard of the Duchess of Spirento. Despite her success, she regretted the choices she had made along the way. Adair chose not to return home to Gilded Vale. Still most comfortable far from cities, he settled in Deerford, which, like many towns in the Deerwood, was beginning the slow process of rebuilding. Believing now that it was the obligation of Kith to be the leaders their gods had not, Adair was soon named mayor of the town, and under his guidance, Deerford soon began to prosper. He expelled the last of the Scanites from the area and drew new settlers with the offer of land, a trick he had learned from someone he otherwise preferred to forget. With each passing day, Deerford would come to more closely resemble the Gilded Vale of Adair's childhood, the one worthy of its name. When the dust settled in sun and shadow, Aloth looked upon the remains of Theos Ix Arcanon, his former master. He saw where the Grandmaster had gone wrong, and he knew what he would do better. The secret of the gods would be preserved, and with it, the sanity and well-being of all Kith. He donned the remains of Theos's ceremonial garb and prepared himself for the long and lonely task ahead. With both their aims fulfilled, Kanarua bid the Watcher farewell and sailed back to his beloved Rawatai. There, he reported on his findings to the Lore College. Kana spoke of the Engwithan people, describing both their vile experiments and their inspiring accomplishments. He spoke too of the destruction of the tablet by the Leaden Key, and the group's efforts to erase the Engwithan legacy from the world. Both inspiration and cautionary tales, he said, could be found in the world beyond Rawatai's borders. Kana urged his people to continue to pursue knowledge abroad, so that the lessons found there might benefit Tekoa. Kana's inability to prove his theory of Engwithan influence diminished his academic standing, but his passion drew much interest from those less concerned with degrees. Kana swiftly became an influential figure in the move toward a more collaborative approach to expansion on the northern continent. In his personal life, he came to enjoy the reputation of an affable eccentric, willing to share grand and impossible secrets, along with a drink and a song. With Theos defeated and the souls released from Sun and Shadow, healthy children were born once again in the Deerwood. The grieving mother sought a place where she might do penance for the birthing bell. She returned to Deerford, where, to the astonishment of the villagers, she delivered the first healthy child in over a decade. She remained there, and with each new birth, she saw a measure of hope restored to the Deerwood and a measure of grace for her own troubled past. Durrance used Mogren's strength only until Theos had been cast from the world, and then swore off her influence entirely. Regret came to weigh heavily on his mind, and a man who had never previously lacked for words or opinions came to embrace silence and contemplation. He continued to wander, penniless and destitute, searching now not for the reason for his goddess's silence, but for a mechanism for revenge. The charred robes he continued to wear as a reminder that he had been burned by his goddess, and not just by the flames of the Godhammer. Yu and Sagani never found Persok together. The Adra figurine had gone dark by the time they emerged from Sun and Shadow, and it was another month before Sagani finally accepted that Persok's trail had gone cold again. Her search took her beyond the Deerwood and as far as the Living Lands. She saw the great coastal cities of Rawatai and the ruins of Old Valia, absorbing the details of these strange and distant lands. 20 years passed before the Adra figurine finally glowed again. When it did, she followed its signal to a quiet hamlet on the outskirts of Adir. There, she met a young farmer and told her of her past as an elder of Masuk. Sagani returned to a village that had forgotten her face, but remembered her story. Masuk greeted her with cautious warmth, and Sagani found that their ways had become strange to her. She also learned that Kalu had perished of winter fever a few years before, and her middle child, Najuo, had died in a raid. But she found her daughter Yakona a hunter and mother of 3, and her son Malak a builder of mighty walls. In them, she came to find her place in the village and the familiar contours of a world that had changed in her absence. For you, the death of Theos brought an end to your waking visions and a silence to the whispers of the past. In their absence, you were able to sleep. The questions of a distant lifetime ceased to trouble your soul. All that remained was what to make of the answer. But at the moment, there was little to be done, and the matter would have to wait. A long journey loomed ahead.